Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Budget Day 2021 Regional Council. I'm Sean Strickland. I'm chair of the Budget Committee, and we are doing this meeting virtually, electronically, out of respect for public health protocols and adhering to social distancing and the provincial orders about staying at home and reducing trips as much as possible. In order to move things along today, we've assigned a mover and a seconder, and we will deal with resolutions in that manner. So I need a motion to start things off to convene into open session, moved by Councillor Erb and seconded by Councillor Foxton. Indicate your approval or disapproval, that'd be great. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Now I'll ask the clerk to do roll call, please. Stevie?
Thank you. Chair Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Armstrong.
Here.
Councillor Clark.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Here.
Councillor Harris.
Here.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Here.
Councillor Lawrence.
Here.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Here.
Regional Chair Redman.
Here.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Here.
All present and accounted for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. It's great to see everyone here today, and thanks so much for your participation from the onset and through to our budget completion today. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. I'll just move into some opening remarks and comments, and then I know the chair has some comments as well, and then we'll get into the presentation from Mr. Dyer and deal with the appropriate resolutions. So welcome to final budget day for 2021 operating and capital budget and the 2021 police services operating and capital budget as well. Challenges continue unabated for community and society as we continue to deal with the pandemic and vaccination rollout. These challenges, as we all know, have impacted our citizens in ways none of us could have predicted, with loss of life, sickness, job loss, declined income, and declined opportunities. But these challenges have not been equally borne by all of our society. The poor, the elderly, women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color have all been impacted disproportionately. Regional revenues have also been seriously impacted through our transit system and costs have increased for pandemic control through public health and ambulance and shelters for the homeless. Many thanks must be extended to the federal and provincial governments for the tremendous amount of financial support they have provided to the region of Waterloo and all municipalities across the country to help stabilize our budgets and continue to make investments in our community. Our police services and their budget has received more public scrutiny and demands for reform. Our chief has responded and adjusted his budget and made changes to the service delivery model to provide more focus on appropriate mental health services and appropriate mental health responses and increased training and action on cultural sensitivity, diversity, and inclusion. Yet questions still remain if these changes are enough. So given these social and financial challenges, how do we strike a budget reflective of our needs to continue to deliver services and keep the lights on, the buses running, the water flowing? At the same time, we respond to a wave of calls for change, all in the midst of a pandemic. Well, we rely on our experience, our collective wisdom of staff and council, and we use our experience to adapt to our changing environment. This is not a status quo budget. This is not the time for status quo budgets. We have targeted a 0% tax increase for our residents at a time of economic uncertainty. If it passes, it'll be the lowest tax increase at the region since 1999. I think a 0% tax increase is fair, We've also targeted investments in programs for businesses, affordable housing, community safety, and policing, which I also think is fair. Our colleagues, each and every one of you, have been aware of, and many of you have prepared additional motions today, using our collective wisdom and demonstrating targeted investments in programs responsive to community needs and requests. This budget, unique in very many ways, is not the end of the community discussion on regional programs, but rather the beginning of future discussions to come. I'm very much looking forward to our deliberations today. With that, Chair Redman.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. We've always been a region that's focused on the future, that's planned for future generations, and 2020 is no exception. In fact, what we have before us in the proposed 2021 budget is unlike any budget in the past few years. It's a reflection of a transformational plan that's fueled by a transformational budget. I'd like to thank the community for your engagement in our budget process this year, and staff for listening to the community and council in the proposed plan and budget for beyond COVID-19. Thank you to Budget Chair Councillor Strickland for his leadership and guidance throughout this process. Council's goal is to improve the lives of all of our 630,000 residents. And while there is a long road to travel, we must also recognize that today is a big step forward in the right direction. There's a lot of hard work ahead for Waterloo Region. I'm excited, truly excited by the world-class community we continue to build upon. For consideration today, Council has a thoughtful, deliberate, and purpose-built plan, a plan that aims to bring better quality of life to all of our residents now and into the future. I look forward to hearing more from my colleagues on their thoughts and the proposed motions before us as we debate and consider how to improve and to approve the 2021 budget this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Redman. And I just would like to remind all of my colleagues to keep your mics muted while we're on this call, unless you're speaking, of course. So thanks very much for those words, Chair Redman. And with that, we'll get right into the presentation. And Mr. Dyer has slides today that are really going to take us through the decision-making process. We've had several meetings on the budget, several opportunities for the public to engage and for us to listen. Today, the budget's in Council's hands, and Mr. Dyer will take us through the decision-making matrix today. Mr. Dyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping that people can see.
Yes, we can.
Can see the deck. Great. And as you indicated, this is not so much a presentation as it is a guide to work us through the order of business that we have planned for the day. Just a very, very brief introduction and a reminder of the context behind this budget, as alluded to by yourself, Chair Strickland, and by Regional Chair. So the COVID-19 pandemic has had significant impacts, financial impacts on the region, predominantly related from a revenue perspective to trade, but other revenues as well, and significant impacts on the costing side in public health, in paramedic services, and in our shelter system, to state just a few. And so we know that the implications of COVID have been felt across the region, and has led us, and the community has led us through this plan to work beyond COVID-19 and to put a budget together that is going to meet the needs of all of our residents and businesses. And so again, as previously indicated, the approach that we've taken with respect to this budget has been thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional, with a desire and a goal to invest in the community as a whole. And as you've seen through the various budget presentations going back to November, we believe we have a budget here that will support the most vulnerable in our community, will address long-standing inequities. We have funding to modernize and streamline our administrative and back office processes. And of course, we'll be managing the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic over the course of this year. This budget, again, this very deliberate and thoughtful budget has been purpose-built around the 5 strategic plan focus areas that have been put in place by this council. And in addition to that, we've added a 6th being the people at the region who will be tasked with implementing the plan over the course of this year and into next year. So in terms, Mr. Chair, of the order of business today and the work that Budget Committee needs to do, we've laid it out into a variety of steps. I'll just walk you through each of the steps and then turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, to conduct the appropriate discussion and votes as required. On today's agenda, there are 3 briefing notes, one which provides an overall summary of the budget and recommends a couple of additional amendments to the budget. These are amendments that don't impact the overall regional levy. We also have a briefing note that outlines to user fees and charges, and then a third which meets the intent of Ontario of the municipal budget regulation as required under the Municipal Act. And so we're going to start with the staff recommended budget adjustments. If you're following along on your agenda, this is agenda item number 7. And the recommendation in the report is to amend the budget, firstly by a little over $3.2 million. This is to reflect the funding and costs associated with the recently implemented COVID Isolation Center. And in addition, to reflect additional provincial funding and costs associated with shelter-based COVID isolation spaces. This is further outlined in more detail in the report. And Mr. Chair, it would be appropriate for Council to consider these recommendations at this moment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dyer. It's moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Harris. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please indicate by using the icon. Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Library Committee.
Yep, so next step is the approval of the library budget. This budget was considered by the Library Committee back in December. It has a levy reduction of just over $200,000. And the motion is included again in today's report and before you here on the screen to approve the operating budget for the library for 2021, as well as the 10-year library capital plan. Again, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dyer. That's moved by Councillor Armstrong and seconded by Councillor Nowak. Is there any discussion? Call the question. Joe's already voted. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to the Library Committee for your work. User fees and charges.
So actually the next thing we'll do, Mr. Chair, is we'll table the main budget motion that captures the budget approval as well as the user fees and charges and the budget regulation. So just a couple of slides leading to that motion. Not expecting you to certainly not memorize this slide. This is the staff report, and what we've outlined here are the 3 figures that you'll find in the first of the recommendations relating to the 2021. This is information that's included in Appendix B to the staff report. And then on the capital side, we have a $385 million capital program in 2021 and an overall 10-year forecast, excluding police, of almost $3.5 billion. And this recommendation would be for a 0% tax impact on the region side. You can see on this table, when you look at the average regional taxes for every $100,000 of residential current value assessment, works out to $403, which is unchanged as compared to 2020. And so the resolutions included in agenda item 11 are to approve the 2021 tax supported operating budget. You can see the net expenditure and the levy and the reference to the 0%. The second part approves the 10-year capital forecast. The third deals with user fees and charges. And the fourth, the budget regulation. So tabling this at this point would put the budget onto the floor, and then we'll subsequently deal with any councillor motions to amend the budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dyer. I don't see any questions. So the main budget motion is moved by Councillor Jowett and seconded by Councillor Kiefer. So we'll get it on the floor, and then we will deal with, we're not going to vote on it. We're going to deal with the amendments, and then we'll come back and vote on it as amended.
That's correct.
Okay. So the first amendment is proposed by Councillor Jowett and Councillor Harris with respect to thriving economy and support for businesses. So Councillor Jowett, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Chair Strickland, and thank you for such a great organized approach to this today. It's really been a pleasure to work with staff and everyone who's really brought all this to a really good presentation today. So yes, motion one that is being put forward this morning is with regard to the thriving economy. The motion is before you. Chair Strickland, you don't want me to read the motion specifically, do you? I just have a
for that motion, for this motion, the others, I will leave it at the discretion of the movers and seconders if they want to read it, but it might make more sense to just to explain it rather than read it.
Okay, certainly it's one of our 5 focus areas for the strategic plan, so I'm really encouraged that it has been included in our motions today. I certainly want to thank Matthew and his very small team of individuals who have worked with our business community, the business partners inclusive of the chambers, the BIAs, tourism, and WEDC have all gotten together and given him significant input, and he spent he and his team have spent a considerable amount of time with them and continue to do so even as of yesterday, late yesterday. So I'm very pleased with all of the collaboration that certainly has existed, and we have taken from our reserves. I just want to make sure I'm quoting the reserve, Chair Strickland, the $3 million from the with regard to the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Reserve Fund. And its source was the tax stabilization reserve over 2021 and 2022. I had some great discussions with Matthew in our economic development, and I'm pleased to see some of the ways with which he's been able to match our unique and specific needs to those of the business community. And I think we'd be behooved to ignore the fact that one of the important things here is that it's the small business who has suffered the most, for sure. Our tech sector has actually seen extreme growth throughout the latter half of COVID. And so we'd like to really focus our efforts on some of the real practical applications, such as patio lights, patio municipal accommodations for licensing onto the streets. We want to be able to see things like PPE for small businesses. And Matthew and his team have come up with a wonderful certification program that I believe that he will speak to. At least I hope he'll speak to it, or I hope that we can ask him about that for sure. So I'm determined that we support strategic intention that lifts those most in need in our business community. Although proud of our tech sector and their resilience, they are not the ones in need. Our restaurants, gyms, retail, looking for those, again, patio heaters, buying local campaigns, safe work procedures, PPE, and the support to make sure that they're keeping their employees safe and healthy throughout the rest of COVID. So if I can leave it with those comments, Chair Strickland, I'd be hopeful that people would ask Matthew some quick questions, because this is a very critical investment in our business community. And again, the small business community employs more than 80% of our working population. So a very critical investment going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jowett. We can tell you're quite passionate about the support for local businesses, and I know Councillor Kiefer wants to say something, but before I open the floor up, I'm just wondering if the seconder, Councillor Harris, would like to make a comment.
No, I think, thank you, Councillor Jowett, for moving that motion. It's no doubt that we've seen undue hardships, especially from our business community during this past year with COVID. So I'm happy to support this motion, and we'll go from there.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Strickland, and thanks, Councillor Jowett and Councillor Harris for bringing this motion forward, I should say. I wanted to make a friendly amendment if I could, Chair Strickland. Shall I read it to you?
Yeah, sure. And if it's friendly or not, it'll be up to Councillors Jowett and Harris. But yes,
Okay.
please let us know.
It is staff will in the implementation plan quantify who and what and how the funds will be appropriated. That would go at the end of that motion if it's friendly.
Is that all right with Councillor Jowett and Councillor Harris? Just need to nod. Okay.
And then Chair Strickland, I have a couple of questions. I like the motion. I need a little more, I guess, information on, for me, it's about defining what the most vulnerable businesses are and the most impacted workforce. I had a little scratch in my head on that one, and pardon the dog in the background. And so if I could get some information on that, or a little more information, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Matthew, can you help with that question, please?
Yes, through you, Chair. So we have, we know that our food and beverage, our restaurant sector has been particularly hard hit at this time when we're thinking about small businesses. So, there's some sectors like that we've already identified, and we will be coming back to council with a list of specific targeted supports that we'll be providing to the small business sectors. But we already know there's certain industries like the restaurant, food and beverage industry that have been particularly hit hard. And as a result of that, we've seen the impacted workforce. So, the workforce that's been temporary or permanently let go from their jobs. And so now it's about looking at how we can support them in reskilling, retraining, either getting back into that industry or looking at getting them into positions in other industries.
Thanks, Matthew. Councillor Kiefer.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Matthew, for that. I'm looking forward to that report because, I was a little concerned about how you pick and choose and what you pick and choose, but I'm sure in the report that's coming back from staff, we'll be able to identify those things. So as I said, I'm in favor of this motion, and it's a good deal for the business sector. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Kiefer. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can certainly support this recommendation, and thanks Helen and Michael for bringing it forward. And I know that there'll be a lot of discussion about the details of this because the devil's always in the details. But just a general question, and I'm not sure if it's for Matthew or whoever, but the province and maybe the federal government are providing and may well provide more relief for businesses. And I'm just curious how we're going to overlay their programs, and so there isn't any duplication where people are able to maybe qualify or apply for certain relief at more than one level of government.
Matthew.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So we do plan, so staff are fully engaged with all of our community partners through initiatives like Best WR, where we are helping businesses navigate the various provincial and federal programs. One of the things that we will be doing, and we have started to do, is identify what programs specifically in different support areas are being offered by the federal and provincial governments. And so what we will return to council with is programs that are cognizant of potential duplication and find places where specifically there is a value add on so that there is an impact with our proposed investment to support small and medium-sized businesses that does not duplicate with existing provincial and federal programs. And we are also continuously monitoring what programs may be coming down the line from senior levels of government, and we'll be cognizant of that in the program development as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a comment to Matthew, echoing Councillor Galloway's commentary, except on the lower tier level. I do know of at least one lower tier that is a put together $1 million program for small business, and at least one BIA, the Uptown BIA, which also has a program. So just to be cognizant of those as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jaworski. Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my questions were asked. This one may be detailed that hasn't been worked out yet, but when these grants are made to small businesses, do they have to bring this into income and it becomes taxable? Or is that something that that hasn't been determined yet?
And Matthew?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So each program has various requirements on how support is claimed. And again, when we develop these specific programs, we will be cognizant of how that impacts any other type of support a business may be receiving from senior levels of government. So we will also report back on that when we come back to council. And how that any type of support received from the region may impact businesses from that perspective.
Good, thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Erb. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thanks, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank staff for the work that they've done on this, as well as the mover and the seconder of the motion. I just want to echo the comments of both, I guess, Councillors Galloway and Jaworski, but in particular, Councillor Jaworski around the lower tier. I think that will be important. And as we look to sort of find synergies between federal and provincial programs, that we also do the same with the municipal ones, because I think we might be able to get bigger bang for our buck. And we, through our Make It Kitchener 2.0 strategy, set aside a few $1 million towards post-COVID relief, and think that if by working together, we'll be able to support our businesses better. I think the other point, as we look at these different sectors, we shouldn't necessarily just look at the sector in its entirety. For example, when it comes to restaurants, there are definitely, that sector as a whole in general has struggled, but there are portions of that sector in talking to some of the operators who have done very well, particularly, purveyors of comfort food and so on, pizza places, some of the, coffee shops, a number of those kinds of places some of them have done really well. And in fact, have seen their sales go up over the past year. So I think as we look at these programs, we need to make sure we're factoring that in and really targeting towards the ones who need the support the most.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Urbanovic. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Chair. And at the end of a long list of speakers, most of my questions have been answered, but I really do concur. I do support this motion, and I certainly am looking forward to seeing the details. And just really more of a comment at this point, I would really support those businesses that have so far fallen through the cracks or through eligibility criteria have not been able to take advantage of some of the upper levels of government, such as the provincial and federal government support program. So I'm certainly in favor of this. I think that we're not going to have full recovery until we are recovering economically as well. So I'm certainly in support of ensuring that all of our businesses are eligible, and particularly those that have not been eligible for other programs and have fallen through the cracks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McGarry. I have no other speakers on this, so I certainly am in support of this initiative. So it, the financial implications are a total of $6 million, $3 million in 2021, $3 million in 2022 to be funded from the tax rate stabilization. So I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor, please indicate, and if you're opposed, please do so as well. Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, the next amendment is for automated speed enforcement I believe, no, sorry, the next amendment is for affordable housing, and Councillor, moved by Councillor Erb and seconded by Councillor Kiefer. So Councillor Erb, you'd like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the sake of time, what is a full day, I'll be very brief. I think over the course of this budget cycle, Council has received fairly adequate information from both staff and myself related to the intent of this motion. I had sent Council a memo last week which detailed my rationale and goal for the motion. And so my assumption is that you have the necessary information that you need to make your decision. For 2021, the motion is intended to have an RFP issued as soon as possible for the creation of affordable housing units. There's currently 2.6 million of provincial funding to allocate. And I am proposing that we take $3 million from the 10 million being proposed from the Housing Capital Reserve Fund and issue an RFP for the 5.6 million as soon as possible. And we know from past experiences that there will be a significant community interest in response to this funding being available. And then secondly, looking ahead to the budget preparation for 2022, I am further proposing a 0.5% from the tax levy that goes to support a reliable and sustainable source of funding for affordable housing. A solid structural foundation is necessary to support the actual physical construction of a house. And to create more adequate and affordable housing, the essential structural foundation is guaranteed sustainable funding. And we all understand that by creating more affordable housing, we enhance more upstream opportunities with many of the social determinants of well-being. And so I hope that on behalf of those who will eventually benefit from more affordable housing and help the region of Waterloo be a leader in this initiative, you'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Erb, and I'll give the seconder the floor to speak to it as well. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Strickland, and I'd be very pleased to second this motion that Councillor Erb has brought forward. I mean, he explained it very well, and the motion is self-explanatory. It is a crucial and necessary thing that we come up with some plan for affordable housing or continued plan, and not the less of which to continue to work with our partners at the provincial and federal government. So I think this is a very good motion, and hopefully you all see it that way. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the list of speakers. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support this initiative. I do liken it to the effort that we put forward a number of years ago. I think only a few members of council might remember the special hospital levy that we did 0.5% or whatever a year, even though it was for the hospitals and the Ministry of Health, or it's really a health cost. We decided that it was a necessary investment in our community to support the redevelopments of all 3 hospitals. And I proposed a similar type levy at the time to raise close to $40 million from the region that was then distributed to the 3 hospitals to support their redevelopment programs, including the Cancer Center, the Heart Institute, and the mental health beds in Cambridge. And so this is the same kind of thing. I think the community has said that we need these investments, even though it may be a provincial and federal program. We need some seed money, and I think that I can support this. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Erb for for this initiative, but also all the various initiatives and the work that he's doing on this particular affordable housing file.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I'm obviously very much in support of this motion. One of the things that I think I like about it, and I guess I'm asking the mover and seconder whether I'm right, is that by doing this ourselves and doing it through an RFP, we can target populations that we feel are the most in need, or we're choosing through our budget to make priorities. And I'm wondering whether that's the intention of the resolution.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Clark, my hope is that when that we would develop the guidelines for the RFP, that would be done in consultation with staff who would have the best knowledge of where those target populations are. But certainly that would be the intent, but staff would provide significant input for that.
Thank you. I think I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot of federal funding for housing coming our way right now. We do have $8.2 million in rapid housing initiative money from the municipal stream, and certainly hope to have more from the project stream. But it's that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do things ourselves, especially when we identify some particular local needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Shantz. You're muted.
Sorry, I moved my mouse and I've got two screens and I couldn't find it. I want to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Erb and all the councillors that have worked on these motions and the work they've put in it, and staff. So thank you for that. I support this motion. I think it's well needed and well crafted. I'm always a little leery about creating taxes for the next tax year. So I wonder if I could just ask, are there other initiatives that are sitting in the budget that are going to affect next year's tax year? I don't remember seeing any, but I may have missed them.
Well, there's, I'll let Mr. Dyer weigh in this as well, but in terms of the councillor resolutions, the only one that may have an impact on the 2022 budget is this. But if you notice, Councillor Erb has been kind enough to give us the latitude that 0.5% proposed levy for housing comes back for final deliberations. I'll let Mr. Dyer add if there's any other implications in the budget for 2022 of note.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The one that comes to mind would be the additional investment that is planned in 2022 for the Black, racialized, and Indigenous communities. An additional $5 million planned for next year. And I'm reminded of the slide that I think we shared with Budget Committee back on January 12th, which outlined some of the factors that would be impacting our 2022 budget. And Councillor Shantz, I'd be happy to send you that slide following today's meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And now that you mention it, Councillor Shantz, the $3 million that we just approved, it has an impact in 2022 as well for small businesses. Is $3 million a year over 2 years, like total of $6 million from tax rate stabilization.
Okay, I guess I guess what I'm wondering in my mind is if we should, and I know we made a commitment to a 0% tax increase this year, but if we should be putting this tax increase in for this year instead of next year. That's what's percolating through my mind. But I can support the motion as it is as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Councillor Shantz. And I have another speaker. So I support the motion also. And I think that, there's been lots of, requests for more money for affordable housing. We recognize this is a priority for a community, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't indicate what our commitment has been over the past. Like, we spend $46 million a year of taxpayers' money right now on affordable housing. This budget is calling for an additional allocation of 20 million, 10 million this year and 10 million next for affordable housing. And of that 10 million for this year, we're going to portion 3 million and get it into the community as fast as possible. So I certainly do support that. But we do punch above our weight when it comes to making investments in affordable housing. And we also have to recognize that this is primarily a federal and provincial responsibility. And I know Councillor Clark says that, but I'm certainly supportive of this motion. I think it's important for us to get this money in and get these RFPs out as soon as possible to meet the immediate need and also continue to make these investments in affordable housing into the future. So thank you to Councillor Erb and Councillor Kiefer. Okay, so we'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment, if you could please indicate. Okay, that's great. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, the next resolution is community safety and automated speed enforcement. Councillor Urbanovic and seconded by Councillor Lorentz. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to go, sorry, I'm just trying to bring it up on my screen. I'm just going to go directly to the operative phrase at the end and focus on that. And it's be it resolved that as part of phase 1, which is currently being implemented with 8 locations and 1 camera, that we partially return to the original plan agreed to by the region and area municipalities and do the following. And there's a slight change to the wording. I had emailed council to that earlier. A, introduce a phase 1B, which sees 8 of the originally contemplated additional 24 camera location stations at school sites be installed for September 2021, with 304,000 in funding for this from the Transportation Capital Reserve. And further, that as part of phase 1B, request staff report back to regional council on the implementation of including POA staffing resources and potential revenues from 1 mobile camera and unit, which could then be rotated to other locations identified by municipalities and based on empirical data and population to better inform a further phase 2 expansion. And this is, as you've noted, is moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Lorentz. And if I can just speak to it briefly. Council will recall that when we originally dealt with this issue some time ago, it was contemplated that there would be 32 locations where we would set up the, for lack of a better word, the bird feeder style of camera locations, and 1 camera would move around the 32 locations. When we weren't sure in 2020 how the COVID funding would play out, we pulled back that capital investment down to
Barry, we lost your sound.
Yeah, I can't hear Barry.
Yeah,
we lost your sound, Barry.
You got me again?
Yep.
Sorry. Okay. I'm getting a little bit of unstableness in my internet connection. So it allows for 8 of the originally contemplated 24 location stations to continue with funding from the Transportation Capital Reserve. And then it also brings back a report on the 1 mobile camera. And council recall in the report that we weren't originally contemplating going that route because we were doing the birdhouse style locations. But this would allow us to find a way to have the other 16 have a rotation happening, or other locations that have been identified through the empirical data analysis. And that would further inform our phase 2 expansion going forward. But this would be subject to a report coming back later in the year for implementation, potentially towards the end of 2021, which staff tell me we could end up dealing with that out of various reserves at that time.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Urbanovic. I'll let the seconder speak to it as well. Councillor Lorentz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support this
I've supported photo radar when they had it, and I was disappointed when they took it away. I think it's one great way to control people that are speeding and control traffic in communities. It also has a big safety factor if applied in residential areas. That's what we're talking about doing here. So I think when the staff comes back with a report, if there's an opportunity to even do more, then I think we should be looking at that. I know this is fairly new. I don't think it's tried in a lot of different communities, but I think it's something that in our school zones would make all the difference in the world. And it would certainly take some pressure off Waterloo Regional Police for traffic enforcement. So I think it's a good way to let the community understand that speeding is not a good thing through school zones. And if we can have one roving, it will certainly keep everybody honest, I think, at the other locations as well. So I certainly support it, and I urge all members of council to do that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Councillor Banovic. Councillor Lawrence. I got a couple of speakers. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I am very supportive of this initiative. Certainly, in school zones is one of the most common complaints in pretty well all our wards, all our municipalities. And thank you to the councillors Verbanovic and Lawrence for bringing it forward. My question would be about the justice system being able to catch up and manage the POA system. Generally speaking, when initiatives start out like this, we have to have capacity in the enforcement and also the justice piece. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody that could speak to that at the moment. But in the meantime, I'm very supportive of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fletcher?
So there is some concern right now about when court and court operations will be fully underway at this point. However, it's anticipated that a certain number of things are already underway, right? So early resolutions, which is when you get a ticket and you want to have a discussion with a prosecutor about your ticket and perhaps either plead your sentence down or whatever, that's still underway at this point in time. Although there is some backlog in that system because we're dealing with things that happened throughout 2020, but it's cleaning up fairly quickly. The trial piece, though, so if you don't like early resolution and you want to actually go to trial, which is sometimes where these things end up going as a first initial go around when it's a new level kind of charge, is not underway, although we anticipate that it will be underway starting in late February or the middle of March. However, this is, of course, subject to provincial guidance and may be subject to change because it's already changed a couple of times throughout the current pandemic. We do have a backlog with respect to trials at this point in time. So the actual hearing of those matters may be delayed. However, there's no kind of end date right now in sight because of COVID-19 and trying to deal with those particular matters, right? So we don't have to hear them within an exact period of time at this point. But it could cause, certainly from an administrative point of view, with going to automated speed enforcement, we recognize that there will be an increase in the number of charges coming in, and that may have ramifications to the staff load and the being able to process those tickets appropriately. And so we are putting in place some checkpoints with respect to the number of charges that may arrive, either automated speed enforcement or other kinds of charges. And then we will have to review our staffing criteria to ensure that we do have people ready to handle these charges as they come through the door.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Councillor McGarry. Thanks, Chris. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. And I certainly support the motion. One of the biggest complaints we get is about driving and speeding. My question is about the empirical data that you're going to use. And I guess you've said empirical data and population. And so I just want to put a plug in to make sure that it's not just by population, because we certainly have, in some school zones where people would be coming through at 80 kilometers an hour because it's a settlement area. So I just want to put a plug in to say, please consider some of the dangers of those high rates of speeds that come through our settlement areas as well.
Councillor Vanovich, you want to respond?
Yeah, just very briefly, and Councillor Shantz, I know that was a sensitive issue, and that's why with the next 8 locations, the intent was that we would proceed with the original agreement between all the municipalities to focus on school sites specifically, as they were identified, 1 per municipality. And then as we look at the mobile unit, that would then start potentially looking at some of those other factors going forward.
Is that intended to be other than school sites then?
Well, I think right now, if you'll recall in the report, we're only focusing on school sites and not the community safety zones. We do have the ability in the future to do that, but that's not something we've pursued at this point.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Good discussion and question. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly will support this. Having been a police officer, I understand the frustration of people. Sitting in my office, I hear an awful lot of complaints about speeding, and I think it's extremely important that this continues. And I think I'm really looking forward to the expansion, because it's not just schools that have the problem. It's all kinds of neighborhoods. So I fully support this and really look forward to the expansion of the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I have no other speakers, so we'll call the question. All those in favor or against, please indicate appropriately. Okay, that's great. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, colleagues. Before we go to the next resolution, I just need to correct something. I misspoke earlier around the business supports. It's 3 million over 2 years, not 3 million a year. So it's 3 million over 2 years from tax rate stabilization, 1.5 million per year. So I just need to make sure that's in the record. Okay, so we'll move on to the next proposed resolution with respect to provincial advocacy on police reform and arbitration. Councillor Clark is moving it, and the seconder is Councillor Harris. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't actually a resolution with any budgetary impacts, but if this is the place where it goes, I'm happy to introduce it here. Municipal budgets, which escalate far more quickly than the cost of living, have long been a source of frustration for many taxpayers in Ontario, as has been the fact that municipal governments, while having responsibility for funding those budgets, have very little control over them. And the frustration reached a peak this year, with many members of the public demanding changes to police spending that simply weren't and aren't in the power of municipal governments to effect. With this 2021 budget, and with the actions outlined in Councillor Erb's affordable housing resolution and the one that we'll hear shortly from Councillor Galloway on upstream initiatives, Waterloo Region has made the spending commitments that were identified by our community as priorities. The purpose of this resolution is to advocate to the province of Ontario to make changes to the factors driving the police budget increases and to provincial legislation and provincial entities that limit and even remove municipal government's influence over police spending. And I will simply say on a personal note that part of the reason that I've felt such frustration is that we've certainly been hearing as municipal government from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who very sincerely want to see police reform. And police reform in Ontario is a provincial matter. And I feel that our provincial colleagues, including our local representatives, have not been hearing loud enough and clearly enough that there's something they need to do here. And I hope that this resolution will bring that to their attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Clark. The seconder is Councillor Harris. Councillor Harris?
Yeah, just briefly, thanks, Councillor Clark. I think it states it here in our resolution, the need for the message to be taken to the province. Clearly, the piece that I was particularly most interested in was, arbitration reform. And we all know that taxpayers often, have limited ability to pay, and municipalities, although we have that ability to continue to tax taxpayers, we have to look at the capacity to pay. And these are measures that I know AMO has long advocated for other municipalities right across the province. And, we hope that our colleagues at Queen's Park, as we know they've done before, currently pick this up and, make some significant changes in order for municipalities to better foot the bill for these important services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillors Clark and Harris. We have several speakers. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support Councillor Clark's motion. This is a really important element and one that some people don't clearly understand in the community. Very important element in trying to deal with the reshaping of police services, as some people think, and I agree, needs to be done. I spent quite a number of years on the Police Services Board, kind of languishing, attempting over and over again to get some of these necessary changes at the provincial level to the Police Services Act, and with the local police association as well. And to not very much avail. The police lobby in our province is very strong, and we really need to have the same type of advocacy that we are seeing with some other initiatives in our community on issues like this as well, with the local MPPs and to a much lesser extent our local MPs. This is really critical if we want to turn things around in the direction I think most people want to go. And I think the circumstances of today, the Black Lives Matter issue that has gone across the continent and beyond, I think is positioning these kinds of advocacies very, very well to our provincial masters. And I firmly support this particular recommendation, and I really hope that the community that is really interested in these matters really take it to heart as well and do that kind of advocacy at the provincial level as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you very much, and I too would like to thank the mover and the seconder for bringing these forward. I think there's a variety of things here that we know that we've been hearing both from the community as well as from elected leaders, and quite frankly also police leaders, that they would like to see some change in some of these areas, including things like who duties are performed by, as well as things such as the opportunity for suspension without pay when conduct is warrants that based on individual sets of circumstances. On the particular issue of looking at a tiered policing or who performs various roles, that is something that I know used to be worked on by the police sector councils, and I mean, there were a variety of sector councils that were funded by the federal government, but that is something that the funding for which ended back in the
We lost your audio again, Barry. No.
Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, I turned off my camera. Sorry. I was just saying there were councils that were in existence, both in policing and other areas that were funded by the federal government. And then they ceased back in the era of the Harper government in Ottawa.
Can't hear you, Barry.
Sorry, we lost you again, Barry.
Didn't you used to be an IT guy?
I did. Am I back now?
You are back. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, all that to say, I'm supportive of this, and let's move it forward.
Great. Thanks very much, Councillor Ivanovic. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Strickland, and I'll be very quick. I too am very much in support and understand, and I'm very grateful for Councillor Clark and Councillor Harris, and certainly a lot of the comments that have already been said. I know that when I was on crime prevention and Larkin was on that council along with Councillor Galloway, there was significant contribution from the police and the changes that we all are discussing. And I think he had a dramatic input in where we'd like to be. I also think we need to connect the dots on putting a horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse, because the structure needs to be in place to be able to support the change before he can move forward. And I think that he's even demonstrated that he's attempting to stopgap some of these problems himself. And so I think right now, more than ever, we need to start advocate clarity on how we can connect the dots for these issues and put the structure in place to be able to support the change so that it can be done better. So just wanted to add that to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I also support this initiative, and I think a couple of points needed to be highlighted. Certainly, this is under provincial jurisdiction, and many people come to their local governments because that's who they know. And I think it's not passing the buck per se. I think it means that our community could certainly band together with the same vigor that they have shown us in the debate since the spring about police budgets, and start to advocate for these changes at the provincial level. And I think this goes a long way in order to sort of highlight how important it is that our community keep advocating at the level of government that can make these changes. I also concur with my colleagues that, as Councillor Jowett said, you either put the horse before the cart or the cart before the horse. And in this instant, when it's coming to police budget and who does what, and, you know, is there a better social service agency or another group that can weigh in on some of the calls that automatically go to police? But you have to have the capacity at that end first. So in the spirit of capacity building, I think that the collection of amended budget motions that have just come forward, we've still got another one on the table here, really act in a collective way in order to actually do the advocacy piece that we need to do as regional council to the appropriate levels of government. And we also need to help support that capacity in the future in order to accommodate being able to make the significant changes that our community and indeed many others would like to see at the policing level, and how to more adequately address some of the social issues that really create so many calls for service. So I'm in full support of this motion. I think that it does go a long way in finally moving the needle that has been so long in moving. And the last thing I really wanted to say is thank you for such an engaged community. I would have really wanted to hear this level of conversation about these subjects when I started on Waterloo Crime Prevention Council in 2007. And I think we're there. I think it's time that we move the needle. So kudos to those who have brought this motion forward. I'm in full support.
Thank you very much, Councillor McGarry. Councillor Lawrence. You're on mute. You're on mute, Jeff.
Thank you. I'll be brief. As someone who looks at this from the point of view, there's only one taxpayer. I think the arguments that we're talking about for the police could be the same said for the fire service. And you know, costs, employee costs are just spiraling out of control. And we need to find a better way to do this. And there are examples in fire service where you don't need uniform inspectors or uniform fire prevention officers. So I think the province has to take a holistic approach to how this works, and affordability by taxpayers to be able to pay, and the way the decisions are coming forward. It just seems like it's never going to end. So I certainly support this. And I think we need to push the province on a larger scale to look at the whole arbitration issue in provincial government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Schatz.
Thank you. And I would like to say ditto to Councillor McGarry's comments. She said it very well. Sitting on the police board, you know, we are trying to accomplish a lot of things that are not really in our purview to accomplish. And so I like this motion because it is advocating for change in the system, which is really what's needed. So I support the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Schatz. Councillor Armstrong.
I'm very supportive of this. Some people may be surprised at that, as I was once a police officer, but I've talked to lots of police officers from across the province over the last few years, and a lot of them are in support of the changes that need to be looked at with the Police Act and policing, and I strongly support this because the one thing I always said when I was wearing the uniform, that it was one job that I wished I was laid off due to lack of work. So I think maybe there are things there that need to be addressed very definitely. So I strongly support the idea of advocating for change.
Thank you very much, Councillor Armstrong. I have no further speakers. Let's make a brief comment, and that is just echoing some of the statements to be made with respect to arbitration. And I think that the Police Service Act it needs to be modernized. I don't know when the last time it was revised, but it certainly needs to be modernized to recognize communities' capacity to pay rather than ability to pay. And also for me, when you look at the police budget, which is $185 million, and 40 million capital funded from the regional tax base, I think it only makes sense in the interest of modernization that we have a little bit more of a say on some of those budget lines. And I don't think it needs to be the entire budget, but you know, I think there should be a partial part of the budget that is open to some discretion and input from regional council, rather than where we're right now, if we don't like what's in the budget, we have to send the whole thing back, which is really brickmanship way of creating budgets. And I think that there's an opportunity to have some more collaboration there to reflect community needs. So I'm fully supportive of the motion. And I thank Councillors Clark and Harris for bringing it forward. So all those in favor of the amendment and those opposed, please indicate appropriately. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Chair Strickland, if I may for a second.
Yep.
It was going through amendment 3 years ago. I was in Ottawa at the time, or at AMO at the time, of the discussion on it, and I was very disappointed at the outcome. So if we lobby, we really have to lobby our points strongly and get other municipalities on board, because it was basically glassed over about 3 years ago.
Right, and this is going to be forwarded to AMO and MPs and so on, so we are going to communicate it widely. I know this is something that's been on AMO's agenda for a long time. Okay, so we have one other additional resolution that was brought forward before committee, and that's with respect to upstream initiatives and community well-being, moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Foxton. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do have a small amendment to my motion, which Councillor Foxton's aware of and is okay with, and I'll get to that at the end of my remarks. I've had a desire for a major upstream initiative that comes from my work on the Crime Prevention Council for the past 13 years. I've long been sold on the empirical evidence that upstream programs that deal with the root causes of crime, poverty, and poor education and health outcomes can have a tremendous beneficial outcome to these particular individuals. I have spoken publicly on crime prevention through social development on a number of occasions, including in Winnipeg, where I had the good fortune of seeing the Bear Clan Patrol community safety model in action. The recent Black Lives Matter movement and Reallocate WR advocacy has clearly heightened the community's understanding and desire for an upstream approach, among other things, of course. Acknowledges that our community is well positioned to take this on because we already have many programs like Safe and Sound, Better Beginnings, Better Future, and numerous upstream type nonprofits already that operate in this realm. We also have a significant restorative justice expertise in our community, which Upstream also speaks to. We see in today's budget proposal, and it's already been discussed, that we are making we're proposing, subject to the main motion, several major investments in upstream programs, including the shelter system, affordable housing, public health, and in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color community. And we recognize that the reshaping of certain police services is an important component of this strategy, this upstream strategy. Now, the action part of my motion is really simply put, is to ask staff to put together a report on how the needed community conversation towards a broad upstream strategy might take place. And specifically, it requests it to consider a pilot project, community safety model pilot project. And additionally, there is a small budget allocation from the Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, basically as a placeholder in case that the not just the report, but the community conversation that's going to ensue, if there is a budget required for that. So I need to emphasize that this motion is not to start the community conversation, but is to start to develop that, how we're going to do that community conversation. I think some people have kind of misread and misunderstood the intent. So when the staff report comes back, presumably sometime in the spring, that's when we'll have the serious discussion on who's involved, who leads it, and a way forward. So, Mr. Chair, the relatively minor amendment I want to make is in the line that ends with "and municipal councils," and I want to add, and Councillor Foxton has agreed, that we add the words "as well as the involvement of a community-led police-free coalition." So in that clause, attempting to identify some of those people and organizations that need to be considered in the report, and I believe there is some legitimacy to this particular coalition that's been suggested, and I'd like to include it as well. And Councillor Foxton has agreed to that amendment.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Galloway. So, slight amendment to the amendment. Councillor Foxton, you seconded it. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want the public to know that Council has listened and we have heard. I'm proud of what Councillor Galloway has put together, and the public will be a part of this as well as Council. And this is a plan of action to move forward, which is exactly what we need at this time. So I thank you, Councillor Galloway, and I thank Council for their openness to all these things, and I thank the public for insisting that your voice be heard.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foxton. We have a couple of speakers. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I'm going to be supporting this motion, and could we just add on the very last line to send a copy as well to AMO and FCM? Just a small thing, but I think we could maybe do that as well.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McGarry.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I'm also in full support of this motion. And a lot of what I had to say around the previous amendment about policing really applies here. Certainly any upstream prevention dollars have significant return on investment when they're invested wisely, especially amongst our youth. Attacking root causes such as poverty, mental health and addiction issues, exclusion, and a number of root causes which cause a lot of the issues in our community that then put significant demands on several of our services, certainly first responders, healthcare, mental health addictions, all of our social service agencies are affected. So I think that this goes a long way in trying to really cement the work that has actually been going on in this community for the last almost 3 decades. We are well positioned in Waterloo region with the municipality's support in order to do this kind of work. And again, it goes a long way to build capacity in our system and our social services and others that can help us to build a healthier community. And in that way, it reduces the demand for services such as our policing and our justice system, because they're not the appropriate measures. We want to prevent that issue going ahead. So again, I'm in full support. I think that we've already got a lot of the pieces in place. We're a collaborative community that's always had multi-sector meetings and multidisciplinary committees that can already continue to expand this work. I could not be more strongly in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McGarry. Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm happy to support the initiative of Councillor Galloway in an attempt to continue the work of the region and is doing to create more upstream opportunities for some of the most vulnerable in our community. And many of the initiatives taken by the region in the past, some of the new items in this budget, and other opportunities in the future, I hope will continue to define the region as being innovative and creative in upstream outcomes to achieve what is intended in this motion. And possibly, the most exciting is the pilot project for a citizen-led community safety program with the intent to find some additional funding strategies. So I'm pleased to support this.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Erb. I have no further comments. I fully support this resolution and this resolution with the previous one from Councillor Clark, I think go hand in glove in that, we are restricted in what we really can do with respect to the police budget, and we're advocating for more changes so we have some more flexibility with the police budget. But we're also, through Councillor Galloway and Councillor Fox's resolution, really indicating, as Councillor Foxon said, that whatever constraints we have, we're working within those constraints and we're listening to the community. We want to make changes. We want to invest in these initiatives and we want to have the community involved as we go forward. So I'm fully supportive, and I think it's really reflective of what we heard from our community throughout this budget process. So my thanks to the mover and seconder. So all those in favor and against, please indicate appropriately. Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So those are all the resolutions that I have from council. So barring any other resolutions, what I would propose is that we go back to the main budget motion moved by Councillor Jowett and seconded by Councillor Kiefer. And we call the question on the main budget motion as amended. So if we're ready for that vote right now, we'll please indicate so if you're for or against. Okay, so I don't see everyone voting. So I think that I've seen my screen that was passed unanimously. So we have a regional budget. Thank you very much, everyone, as amended with all those additional resolutions from council, and kudos to everyone who's been involved with those resolutions and the ongoing discussions I think we've done some good work on the original budget for sure, and also as relates to the police services budget, which is the next item of business. I believe Mr. Dyer, as he's sharing his screen. Do you want to speak to this, Mr. Dyer, or we'll just proceed with the resolution?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chair, the figures for the police budget provided in our staff report and as approved by the police board back on December the 16th, both operating and capital, and we have two motions for budget committee's consideration on the screen before you.
Okay, so we'll get this on the floor. That's moved by Councillor Lorentz, seconded by Councillor Erb. Councillor Clark.
I'd like to ask that the two A and B be taken separately.
Okay. Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, so let's vote on A. And Mr. Dyer, just for clarification, that 1.6% translates into 0.5%, 0.51, is it, on the overall regional levy?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So all those in favor of A? Okay, that is passed with 1 against. All right. Item B. All those in favor? Okay, that is passed unanimously. So we have passed the police budget, and I believe there's no further business in front of the committee. So we have a regional budget and a police budget. I'd like to thank everyone for the deliberations this afternoon and staff throughout the process, and especially like to thank our CAO, Bruce Lochner. This was his very first budget, and it was a different one. So as I had a conversation a couple times with Bruce throughout the process, that you know, gently reminding him that this is new to us too, because we've never passed a budget like this before. So it was a new experience for everyone, and I really thank staff and Bruce for your leadership and guidance, and Mr. Dyer and his team, as always, fantastic job. Today's proceedings were very well laid out and thought out. I also like to thank you know, the chair staff, Teresa and Chair Redman, for her support and guidance throughout the process as well. So thank you very much. We'll adopt the budget tonight at council, unless there's any other discussion. Councillor Lorentz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you for all the hard work and effort you put into this. As you mentioned, this has been, with COVID, it's been really strenuous on everyone. I know you had some changes in your personal life as well, and I think you did a fantastic job in bringing all of this together and working with not only finance staff, but Mr. Lochner and everybody else. So congratulations, Chair Strickland. You did a hell of a job, and I'm very proud of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Lorentz. And you guys made it all that much easier. It was a very collegial effort. You know, I appreciate everyone's support. Thank you. So a motion to adjourn. Councillor Shantz and Councillor Rabanovic called a question. I guess we're on next at 6:30 for in caucus. Is that right? Our next meeting is at 6:30?
6:15.
6:15. Okay, so.
You stay on this call?
And you want us to stay on this call?
Yes, please.
Okay, so cameras and mics off, and motion to adjourn. I see everyone's voting already, so I think that passes, and it passes